Imagine this. You're scrolling through your feed late at night, the glow of the screen casting shadows across your face, and suddenly you pause. Not because something profound caught your attention, but because of what didn't. Between the dance videos, the outrage, the carefully curated lives of strangers, you realize something unsettling. You can't remember the last time you encountered an idea that made you genuinely uncomfortable. Not offended, not angry, but uncomfortable in the way that forces you to question whether everything you believe might be built on sand. Now imagine that same feeling spreading across an entire civilization. Picture a world where the most followed voices belong not to those who think deeply, but to those who perform loudly, where wisdom is mistaken for pessimism, and ignorance, when wrapped in confidence, is celebrated as authenticity, where the person who admits, "I don't know," is seen as weak, while the one who speaks with absolute certainty about everything is crowned as a leader. You don't have to imagine this world. You're living in it right now. Today we are going to explore that through the lens of Socrates, the man who dared to question everything and paid with his life for it. And stay with me until the end, because the final revelation will completely change the way you see modern culture and your own place within it. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, do you think our society still values wisdom, or have we traded it for entertainment? Because what you'll discover today might not only challenge your opinions, it might shake the very foundation of how you understand human progress. But here's the question that should haunt you. How did we get here? How did a species capable of philosophy, art, and science, capable of pondering the infinite and creating beauty from chaos, end up building monuments to mediocrity? How did we go from seeking truth to worshiping whatever feels good, sounds right, or gets the most attention? And perhaps more terrifying, what if we chose this? What if the worship of ignorance isn't something that happened to us, but something we actively constructed, brick by brick, like notification by notification? Look around you now. What are we certain about? Everything. Our opinions on politics, morality, success, happiness, delivered with the confidence of prophets, backed by the authority of whatever we last read online. We live in an age where information is infinite, yet understanding is vanishing, where everyone has answers, but nobody has wisdom, where the loudest voice wins, not because it speaks truth, but because it drowns out the silence where truth might actually be found. And here's the paradox that should stop you cold. We mock the past for burning books, for silencing philosophers, for killing messengers who brought uncomfortable truths. Yet we do the same thing now, not with fire or poison, but with algorithms that hide what challenges us and amplify what confirms us. We've built an entire digital infrastructure designed to ensure you never have to hear an idea that makes you genuinely question yourself. We call it personalization. Socrates would have called it the death of the examined life. So ask yourself this. When was the last time you genuinely changed your mind about something important? Not a preference, not a trivial opinion, but a foundational belief? If you can't remember, you're not thinking anymore. You're defending. And a mind in defensive mode isn't seeking truth, it's protecting territory. This is how the worship begins. Not with a declaration of allegiance to ignorance, but with a quiet surrender of curiosity. With the moment, you stop asking questions and start demanding answers that feel right, rather than ones that are true. But here's what Socrates understood that we've forgotten. Ignorance isn't the problem. The illusion of knowledge is. And that illusion is more powerful now than ever before. So, the question isn't whether we're worshiping idiots. The question is, why? What psychological, cultural, and spiritual forces led us to build a civilization that rewards stupidity and punishes thought? And more urgently, can we still escape? Or have we gone so far down this path that wisdom itself has become unrecognizable, mistaken for cynicism or elitism or simply irrelevant noise in an age that values only what trends? The answer lies buried in the very foundations of how we've learned to think, or rather, how we've been taught to stop thinking. And to uncover it, we'll need to do what Socrates did. Ask questions that make us uncomfortable. Questions about power, about truth, about the silent forces shaping our minds without our knowledge. Are you ready to look? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's exactly where wisdom begins. The problem didn't start with social media. It didn't begin with television or even with the printing press. The seeds of our current crisis were planted the moment human beings discovered something more intoxicating than truth, the feeling of being right. And once that drug entered our bloodstream, we became addicts. Socrates recognized this addiction in ancient Athens, watching as the Sophists, the influencers of their time, turned wisdom into a commodity and certainty into currency. The Sophists were brilliant. They understood something fundamental about human psychology that we're only now rediscovering through neuroscience. The brain doesn't primarily seek truth, it seeks coherence. It craves the feeling of understanding, even if that understanding is an illusion. When someone tells you something that aligns with what you already believe, your brain releases dopamine. You feel validated, confirmed, right. And that feeling is so pleasurable that we'll pay almost any price to experience it again. We'll ignore contradictory evidence. We'll dismiss alternative perspectives. We'll surround ourselves only with voices that echo our own thoughts back to us. This isn't a moral failing, it's neurological. But knowing that doesn't make us less enslaved to it. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly when he wrote that people don't want truth, they want certainty. Truth is uncomfortable. It shifts. It demands that we change when new evidence emerges. But certainty? Certainty allows us to sleep peacefully at night, convinced that we've figured it all out. Nietzsche called this the will to power, disguised as the will to truth. We don't pursue knowledge to discover reality. We pursue it to dominate it, to bend it into shapes that serve our egos. And the ego, as Carl Jung understood, would rather be consistently wrong than admit it knows nothing. Jung went further. He argued that modern civilization had created a collective shadow, all the uncomfortable truths we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, pushed into the darkness where they grew monstrous. We project this shadow onto others, onto different political parties, onto foreign nations, onto anyone who reminds us of what we've hidden from ourselves. The worship of idiots isn't just about celebrating ignorance. It's about finding figures who give us permission not to look inward. As long as we're focused on them, on their performances, their controversies, their simple answers to complex questions, we never have to face the terrifying prospect of our own depth. This is why Socrates was so dangerous. His method, the dialectic, was designed specifically to strip away these psychological defenses. When he asked, "What is justice?" he wasn't seeking a definition he could memorize. He was forcing people to recognize that they'd been living their entire lives guided by concepts they'd never truly examined. Imagine the psychological earthquake that causes. You wake up one morning thinking you're a good person who understands right and wrong, and by afternoon, a strange man asking simple questions has revealed that you can't even define the principles you claim to live by. That kind of confrontation doesn't just challenge your ideas, it challenges your identity. And identity, as psychologists now understand, is what we protect most fiercely. Research in cognitive psychology shows that when our core beliefs are threatened, the same regions of the brain activate as when we're physically attacked. Your brain literally interprets an intellectual challenge as a threat to your survival. This is why debates so rarely change minds. This is why presenting someone with facts that contradict their worldview often makes them believe their original position even more strongly. A phenomenon psychologists call the backfire effect. We're not thinking, we're defending. And you can't pursue wisdom while you're in defensive mode. The Sophists of ancient Athens understood this psychology of manipulation. They didn't teach people how to think. They taught them how to win arguments. They turned discourse into sport, where the goal wasn't truth but victory. They charged enormous fees to teach young aristocrats the art of persuasion, how to make the weaker argument appear stronger, how to use emotional manipulation and rhetorical tricks to sway crowds. Philosophy, which Socrates saw as the love of wisdom, became rhetoric. The love of influence, and the society that allowed this transformation. It sentenced its greatest philosopher to death, while celebrating the performers who told people what they wanted to hear. We've done the same thing. We've turned our public square into an arena where ideas are judged not by their truth, but by their virality. Where the metric of success is engagement, not enlightenment. Where controversy is more valuable than clarity. The algorithm doesn't care if you understand something deeply. It cares if you click, share, and return. And so we've created a system that rewards the very psychological impulses Socrates warned against. The preference for pleasing lies over difficult truths. The celebration of confidence over competence. the triumph of appearance over essence. This is the hidden problem. We've built an entire civilization on the psychological weaknesses that philosophy was meant to overcome. And we've done it so effectively that most people don't even realize they're trapped. They think they're thinking when they're actually repeating. They believe they're learning when they're actually being programmed. They assume they're free when they're dancing to rhythms they didn't choose and can't hear. The worship of idiots isn't an accident. It's the inevitable result of a system designed to exploit our deepest psychological vulnerabilities, our need for certainty, our fear of being wrong, our desire to belong, our addiction to feeling right. And until we understand these forces, we remain their prisoners, applauding our own chains while calling it freedom. The most terrifying thing about a cage you can't see is that you'll defend it as freedom. Right now, millions of people are scrolling through carefully curated feeds, believing they're exploring the world when they're actually being shown a mirror, a distorted reflection of their own biases, preferences, and fears. They think they're informed. They feel connected. But what they've actually become is predictable. And predictability, in the hands of those who understand human psychology, is another word for control. This is the unseen consequence Socrates would recognize immediately. We've created a world where people are shaped by forces they can't perceive, and they've come to love their shaping. The Athenian agora, where Socrates wandered asking his uncomfortable questions, has been replaced by the digital marketplace where questions are answered before you finish typing them, where your next thought is predicted by an algorithm that knows you better than you know yourself. We call this convenience. Socrates would call it the death of self-knowledge. Consider what's happening in your brain right now, in this very moment. Neuroscience has revealed that your conscious mind, the part of you that believes it's making decisions, is actually receiving information milliseconds after your unconscious mind has already decided. You think you're choosing what to click, what to watch, what to believe. But studies show that your brain has already committed to the action before your conscious awareness catches up. Now imagine that unconscious process being studied, mapped, and exploited by systems designed to keep you engaged. You're not choosing anymore. You're being chosen for. The cognitive bias researchers call this the illusion of conscious will. We experience ourselves as the authors of our actions, but we're often just narrators arriving late to explain decisions our unconscious already made. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. Those unconscious processes can be hijacked. Every time you receive a notification and feel that small surge of dopamine, your brain is being rewired. Every time you see content that confirms your worldview and feel that warm glow of validation, neural pathways are being strengthened. You're not just using technology, you're being conditioned by it. Pavlov would be amazed at what we've done to ourselves voluntarily. But here's the consequence that's hardest to see. Because it's happening inside you. You're losing the ability to hold complex thoughts. Research in cognitive psychology shows that our capacity for deep reading, the kind that requires sustained attention and contemplation, is deteriorating. We're becoming what Nicholas Carr called pancake people, spread wide and thin, connected to everything but understanding nothing deeply. When was the last time you read something that took genuine effort to comprehend? When did you last sit with an idea for hours, days, wrestling with it until you truly understood it? The answer for most people is never, or so long ago it feels like another lifetime. And that's not because we're less intelligent than previous generations. It's because we've been trained through thousands of micro-interactions with technology to expect immediate gratification, instant answers, and quick hits of novelty. Our attention spans haven't naturally shortened. They've been deliberately fragmented. The consequence? We're losing the cognitive capacity for the very kind of thinking that could save us from the trap we're in. Socrates would recognize this immediately as the final stage of intellectual corruption. It's not enough that people believe falsehoods. They've lost the mental architecture required to recognize truth when they encounter it. They can't follow a complex argument. They can't sit with ambiguity. They can't tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. So they gravitate towards simple answers, charismatic personalities, and tribal identities that do their thinking for them. The worship of idiots isn't just a cultural preference. It's become a cognitive necessity for minds that have been rewired to reject complexity. The ultimate unseen consequence is this. We're becoming strangers to ourselves. In our rush to project an identity online, to curate a version of ourselves that garners approval, We've lost touch with who we actually are. We've confused our social media personas with our authentic selves. We've replaced self-knowledge with self-branding. And in that replacement, we've surrendered the very thing Socrates believed was most essential to being human: the examined life. We don't examine anymore. We perform. We don't reflect. We react. We don't think. We echo. And the tragedy, the real, profound tragedy, is that most people reading this will nod in agreement, thinking it applies to others, never suspecting that they too are caught in the same web. That's the final unseen consequence. The trap is so sophisticated that recognizing you're in it feels like proof that you're not. You think, I'm aware of these problems, so surely I'm immune to them. But awareness without action is just another form of spectatorship. You watch yourself being controlled, and you mistake that watching for freedom. Socrates would weep. The rebellion doesn't begin with storming the gates or deleting your accounts in a dramatic gesture of defiance. It begins with something far more radical and far more difficult: the willingness to sit alone with your own mind and ask, what do I actually know? Not what have I been told. Not what feels true. Not what my tribe believes. But what can I actually defend with reason, evidence, and honest self-examination? That question, simple as it sounds, is revolutionary. Because the moment you ask it sincerely, you've already started to break free. Socrates didn't defeat the Sophists with better rhetoric or louder arguments. He defeated them with a method, the dialectic, that was essentially a technology of consciousness. He would ask a question, receive an answer, then gently probe that answer until contradictions emerged. Not to humiliate, but to illuminate. Not to win, but to awaken. And here's what made his method so powerful. It didn't require you to believe him. It only required you to think honestly about your own beliefs. The truth revealed itself through the process of examination. You couldn't be manipulated into wisdom. You had to think your way into it. This is the first act of rebellion. Reclaim the practice of questioning. Not the performative questioning we see online, where people ask rhetorical questions designed to make a point, but genuine inquiry, where you don't know the answer and you're willing to be surprised by what you discover. Start with yourself. What do you believe and why? Can you articulate the reasons? Or have you simply inherited opinions from your environment? When someone challenges your view, do you feel curious or defensive? That feeling, that immediate emotional response, is your first clue about whether you're thinking or just protecting. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the most meaningless circumstances imaginable, taught that between stimulus and response lies our freedom. But accessing that freedom requires creating space, literal mental space, where you can pause before reacting. The digital age has eliminated that space. Notification, reaction, post, response, outrage, counter-outrage. The cycle moves so fast that contemplation becomes impossible. So the second act of rebellion is this: build buffers. Don't respond immediately. Don't share instantly. When you feel that surge of anger or agreement, stop. Wait. Let the emotion pass and then ask, is this true? How do I know? What am I not seeing? This practice sounds simple, but it's agonizing in execution. Your brain will scream at you to engage, to defend, to be part of the conversation while it's hot. That screaming is the addiction talking. You've been conditioned to need relevance, to fear missing out, to crave the dopamine hit of engagement. Breaking that conditioning requires treating your attention like the precious, finite resource it is. Because attention isn't just what you focus on, it's what shapes who you become. Show me where you direct your attention, and I'll show you who you're becoming, whether you intended it or not. But here's where it gets truly rebellious. You have to be willing to be alone with your conclusions, even when they isolate you from your tribe. History's greatest thinkers, Socrates, Galileo, Nietzsche, Jung, all paid the price of intellectual honesty with social rejection. They saw things others couldn't or wouldn't see, and they refused to pretend otherwise for the sake of belonging. That refusal is what we've lost. We've become so terrified of social isolation that we'll believe obvious falsehoods if that's what keeps us in the group. We'll ignore our own perceptions. We'll gaslight ourselves. Anything to avoid being alone. Yet solitude is precisely where wisdom is born. Not loneliness, solitude. The deliberate choice to step back from the noise and ask yourself questions nobody else is asking. Nietzsche went into the mountains. Thoreau went to the woods. Socrates walked barefoot through Athens, present in body but utterly alone in mind, guided by what he called his daemon, an inner voice that told him when he was straying from truth. You don't need mountains or woods. You just need the courage to turn off the feed, close the browser, and sit with your own thoughts until they become clear. Another act of rebellion is accepting uncertainty as a strength, not a weakness. In a world that rewards loud certainty, saying, "I don't know," or "I'm not sure," or "I need to think about that," becomes a revolutionary act. It signals that you value truth over tribal approval. It shows that you're willing to look foolish in the short term to be wise in the long term. This is what Socrates meant by knowing that you know nothing, not that you're completely ignorant, but that you're aware of the vast ocean of your ignorance and you're okay with that. You're comfortable in the discomfort of not having all the answers. Finally, the rebellion requires you to rebuild your relationship with information. Stop consuming content like it's entertainment. Start treating ideas like they matter, like they have consequences, like they shape the architecture of your mind, and therefore, your life. Read deeply instead of broadly. One book thoroughly understood is worth more than 100 skimmed. One conversation where you genuinely listen is worth more than 1,000 exchanges where you're just waiting for your turn to talk. Quality over quantity, depth over breadth, understanding over information. This is how you break free. One thought at a time, one question at a time, one moment of genuine reflection at a time. You won't escape completely. We're all embedded in this system to some degree. But you can create pockets of sovereignty within yourself, spaces where your mind is truly your own. And those spaces, small as they might seem, are where the revolution begins. Not in the streets, not online. In the quiet chambers of consciousness where you decide, moment by moment, whether you'll think for yourself or let others think for you. Socrates died for that choice. The question is, are you willing to live for it? Here is the truth that changes everything. The revelation that Socrates carried with him to his death and that echoes across 24 centuries with undiminished power. The worship of idiots is not a bug in human civilization, it's a feature. It's not an accident that happened to us. It's a choice we make, again and again, because wisdom demands something most people are unwilling to give, the sacrifice of certainty, comfort, and belonging. The society doesn't worship fools because it lacks access to wisdom. It worships fools because wisdom is terrifying, and ignorance, when performed with confidence, offers something wisdom never can. The illusion that life is simple, that answers are easy, that you can know everything without sacrificing anything. When Socrates stood before the Athenian court, accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, he could have saved himself with a simple apology. He could have played the game, shown remorse, promised to be quiet. Instead, he told them something that sealed his fate. I would rather die having spoken in my manner than speak in your manner and live. In that moment, he revealed the ultimate truth about human society. It doesn't want prophets, it wants mirrors. It doesn't want teachers who challenge it, wants entertainers who confirm. And when a genuine philosopher appears, someone who refuses to flatter the crowd's illusions, the crowd doesn't debate him. It destroys him. But here's what makes this revelation so profound and so potentially liberating. Once you understand that the worship of ignorance is a choice, you realize that wisdom is also a choice. Not a comfortable one, not a popular one, but a choice nonetheless. Every single day, you wake up and decide whether you'll think for yourself or let others think for you. Whether you'll pursue truth or settle for comfortable lies. Whether you'll examine your life or simply live it on autopilot, reacting to stimuli like a sophisticated machine. That decision, made in 1,000 small moments throughout each day, determines not just what you believe, but who you become. Carl Jung spent his life exploring the depths of the human psyche, and what he found there was both beautiful and terrifying. He discovered that most people will do anything, to avoid facing their own souls. They'll work themselves to exhaustion, medicate themselves into numbness, surround themselves with constant noise, anything to avoid the confrontation with their authentic selves. Because that confrontation requires admitting that most of what you thought was you is actually just programming. Your opinions, mostly inherited. Your desires, largely manufactured. Your sense of identity, cobbled together from external sources, parents, peers, media, culture, until the real you, the essential you, is buried so deep you've forgotten it exists. This is why the Socratic method is more than just a technique for winning arguments. It's a surgical tool for cutting away the false self. When Socrates asked, "What is virtue?" and someone gave him the standard cultural definition, he wasn't just challenging their answer. He was challenging their entire sense of who they were. Because if you've built your identity on being a virtuous person, and suddenly you can't even define virtue coherently, what does that make you? This psychological earthquake is what made people want to kill him, not because he was arrogant or cruel, but because he forced them to see that they'd been sleepwalking through life, calling it consciousness. And here's the part that should shake you to your core. You're doing the same thing right now. Yes, you. Reading this, nodding along, thinking you're different from the masses who worship ignorance. But ask yourself honestly, how many of your beliefs have you actually examined? How many of your certainties could you defend if someone like Socrates started asking questions? How much of what you call thinking is actually just repeating things you've heard from sources you trust because they confirm what you already believe? The ultimate truth is this: the examined life isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's a practice, a discipline, a daily choice to face the uncomfortable possibility that you might be wrong about everything, even this, especially this, because the moment you think you've figured it out, the moment you believe you've transcended the trap that catches everyone else, that's when you've fallen into the deepest trap of all spiritual pride, disguised as wisdom. Socrates understood this perfectly. His famous statement, "I know that I know nothing," wasn't false humility or rhetorical flourish. It was the recognition that wisdom begins where certainty ends. Every answer you think you have is potentially the prison that stops you from seeing deeper truth. Every time you say, "I know," you close a door in your mind. Every time you say, "I'm not sure," you open one. This is why he was the wisest man in Athens, not because he knew more than others, but because he alone understood the infinite vastness of what he didn't know. Think about what this means for how you live. Right now, in this moment, you're at a crossroads. You've been at 1,000 times before, but maybe now you can finally see it clearly. One path leads toward comfort, certainty, and belonging. It's the path where you accept the ready-made answers, join a tribe that thinks like you, and spend your life defending positions you never truly examined. It's the path most traveled because it's paved with social approval and the warm glow of feeling right. The other path leads toward discomfort, doubt, and often solitude. It's the path where you question everything, including yourself, where you accept that you might be wrong, where you value truth over tribal loyalty. It's the path Socrates walked, and it led to a cup of hemlock. Here's the final truth. The moment you dare to ask yourself what is true, and mean it, really mean it, willing to follow the answer wherever it leads, you step outside the crowd and into your own light. You become, in that moment, a philosopher, not someone who loves debate, but someone who loves truth more than comfort, understanding more than approval, wisdom more than belonging. And while the world may not reward you for this choice, while you may find yourself alone more often than not, while you may pay the same price Socrates paid in smaller, quieter ways, you'll possess something the crowd can never take from you, a mind that's truly your own. That's the revolution. Not in the streets, not online, in the quiet chambers of consciousness where you decide moment by moment, thought by thought, whether you'll think for yourself or let others think for you. Whether you'll examine your life or just live it, whether you'll worship at the altar of ignorance or walk the lonely path of wisdom. Socrates chose his path and died for it, but he died free, his mind intact, his integrity uncompromised, while those who killed him lived on, enslaved to the very illusions they were trying to protect. So, before you close this and return to the endless scroll, ask yourself one final question. Am I living awake or am I still asleep among the dreamers? The answer to that question could change everything. Because the true revolution, as Socrates taught us 24 centuries ago, does not begin in the world. It begins in the mind, and it begins now if you let it. The only question is, will you?